Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
William Wallace Abshire, Paul Vernon Adams, Mark Afflerbach, John Ira Alec, Frederick Larry Allums, Randolph Jefferson Ard, Frederico Arnado, Alan Ray Arnold, Kenneth Harold Arnold, Raymond Jamie Arroyo, Glenn Frederick Austin, James Linwood Avery, Richard Anthony Baglio, Richard Duncan Barr, Joseph William Baker, Harold George Bean Jr., Ralph Russell Berg, Enrique Munoz Bernal, Terry Lee Blair, Stephen Paul Blanchett, Richard Joseph Boys, Stephen Floyd Booth, James Richard Bowers Jr., Rudy Gordon Bowman, Philip Michael Brandon, William Ned Britton, Thomas Michael Brockmeyer, Gerald Keith Brown, Michael George Brown, James Robert Bryant, Marion McLean Burke, Sheldon John Burnett, Linnell Butler, Stephen G. Carlos, Carmine Casillo, Caldwell M. Cawthon, Jr., Oscar Edward Chambers, Harlow Gary Clark, Jr., Ralph Edward Consevich, Leslie Cook, Edward Richard Cordeaux, Benny Lee Cross, Mathis Daniel, Clifford Morris Davis, Jr., Abraham R. Derryberry III, Ralph Douglas DeFate, James Larry Downs, Edward Duty, Thomas Wayne Ferguson, Michael Richard Fork, Dean Franklin Fox, Patrick Loyal Frick, Albert Henry Gates, Jr., Gary Richard George, J. Barry Gilpin, Richard Gunnell, Orange Gooding, William Franklin Goodwin, Dale Edward Greenwood, John Charles Haynes, Jr., Richard David Hall, Ralph Lewis Hamill, Barry Andre Hansen, Stephen Worth Hathaway,
Clarence Alvin Heckman, Dennis Ray Heerman, Kenton Elwood Henniger, Dan Selman Hicks, Edward L. Hodge, Craig Sewell Hogan, Edward Lee Hoover, William Carl Hopper, Carter Avery Howell, Little J. Jackson, Billy Dale Jackson, Paul Joseph James, Sterling Price Johnson, Stephen Howard Johnson, Victor Johnson, Jr., Charles Wayne Jones, Jimmy Jack Jones, Jr., Robert Edward Casper, James Kelly Keith III, Charles Franklin Kennedy, Kei Kazu Kimura, James Edward Kennard, Arnold David Kirk, William Joseph Golenik, Adolf J. Kreuzenberger, J. Wesley Ladner, George McGee Lamberton II, Stephen Leslie Lane, David Daniel Lane, Nelson Sailor Lehman, Jr., Theodore Thomas Leo, Max Lieberman, Larry William Liss, Glenn Allen Lovett, Carlos O. Maldonado, Hoyle Martin, Dwight Benny Mayer, Roger James Mazzal, Cecil Darrell McCann, Charles D. McCharley, Jr., William L. McCormick, Ben McCullough, Jr., Louis Levi McDonald, William James McNamara, Wayne Edward Mees, Joseph James Melnick, Jr., Robert Lester Miller, David Robert Morgan, George Robert Morgan, William Jeffrey Moldovan, Richard Laverne Muser, James Ray Muth, David Jesus Narando, Joseph Edwin Neski, Daniel John Orlikowski, John Sadano Otaki, Gordon Lee Page, Lowell Todd Peterson, Hiram Barry Port, Charles Howard Rampley, James Gary Randall, Ted Quinton Reed, Jr., Larry Ray Riddle, Edwin Michael Reidenauer,
Charles David Ricard, Marvin Lee Ringoon, John Asdrubal Rivera, Jerry Clayton Robbins, Theodore Matthew Ropchak, Stephen Arthur Rush, Joseph Charles Russo, Randall Jack Sandoval, Thomas Lasanda Scott, John Herbert Chala, John Alda Sickle III, Andrew William Smith, Jeffrey Earl Smith, Nelson Lee Smith, Harold Victor Smith, Martin Jesus Soto, Benjamin George Spears, Roger James Spence, Ralph Lloyd Stillwagoner, George Edward Sweat, Warren Gambiel Tedrick, Jr., Larry Robert Tenda, Lee Daniel Thomas, Billy Dean Thomas, Donald Wayne Tisdale, Luis Fernandez Torres, Thomas Valerio, Charles Albert Van Horn, Harry Kenneth Vaughn, Larry Dean Watts, Terrence Lee Weint, Daniel David Webb, John Hayden West, Esau Whitehead, Jr., Thomas James Whitlow, Jr., James Lawrence Wheeler, Nathaniel Williams, Jr., Howard Daniel Willis, Louis Bracy Wilson, Jan Franklin Wilson, Donald Ray Wishon, Lanny Gale Wright, Gertie Albert Wright, Jr., Eugene Young.